So next, I wanted to make a shift to share research suggesting that increasingly this basic need to belong is not being met. A lot of this research comes from Harvard professor Robert Putnam, and he studied social capital, and has detailed a steady and growing decline in communities since the late 1960s. He described it as a cultural shift from cooperation and community toward competition and individuality. One way to think of it is as a shift from we to me. Brene Brown describes it as a disconnection crisis. Most recently, Johann Hari's book, Lost Connection, is a great resource for those wanting to better understand how the decline of community is impacting our mental health. And one thing that jumps out to me, right, most of this data is all pre-COVID. So I can't help but wonder, especially like looking at that second statistic, what that might look like 13 years later. And one key idea here, you see in the news, a lot of what's happening now is being blamed on COVID, rightfully so. But it's important we remember this has been happening, the decline of community has been happening for a long time. And I think, we as teachers have seen that increasingly. Putnam's work details the toll a lack of community takes on a society as a whole. As he explains, social capital makes citizens happier and healthier. It reduces crime, improves academic achievement, and allows for more effective run governments and economic productivity. So the decline of community also has important implications on our systems, not just on individuals. Systems rely on people and teamwork to be effective. In particular, Putnam detailed 5 ways our systems rely on community. First, with more cohesion between groups, collective problems can be more easily resolved. This has direct implications to student behavior and classroom management, where students seem increasingly unable to solve conflict. Similarly, departmental conflicts at the district level can create inconsistent and conflicting goals for school sites. The second major way is since in communities, people trust each other. There's less need to spend time and money enforcing contracts and laws. The decline of trust makes it harder for students to learn and almost certainly contributes to defiance issues, peer conflicts, and more. Third, social capital widens our awareness of our mutual connectivity, which tends to improve the quality of our civil and government institutions. In the classroom, when students are working toward a common goal rather than competing, more learning occurs. Conflicts are minimal and more material is covered. Fourth, a sense of belonging and community increases the amount of information exchanged and speeds up the flow of information. So again, when students are working together on a shared mission, they tend to share information and resources, allowing all students to grow. And then finally, social capital improves our health and happiness through both psychological and biological processes which require connection. And in short, happier and healthier students learn better. So what I wanted to really try to highlight here is this disconnection crisis is not just impacting individual students. It's making it harder to teach, to run a school, or to lead a group of kids. In the chat, feel free to share any insights. How is the disconnection crisis impacting your classroom systems? There's an example that really hit me last winter. I was teaching a group of students finishing up their teaching credential. And after years of online learning back in the classroom was overwhelming for many. Some would not show up due to mental illness. Others would leave class after 5 minutes. And after the first weeks, I became worried because these young adults were about to lead a room full of kids 6 hours a day and were totally uncomfortable talking to each other. So it really made me change my teaching style. Is it Marin Foot? that that's a powerful statement. Social interactions between students is toxic. Yeah, and that says a lot. And I think that's one thing like as a behavior person you see and wanted to was a driving force for trying to take a chance and write a book about how we can work on that. So when I changed my teaching practice, I mean, we had to just do icebreakers, just basic social interactions, getting them in the habit of having back and forth conversations, relying on icebreakers, activities, and group work. And it was really fun because, being young college students, they would roll their eyes and give me looks when I said, we're going to do this icebreaker activity. But they really opened up very quickly and they got excited and it became difficult to bring them back. Absolutely. There was one student in particular that couldn't last, was having some, identity issues, and he couldn't last in class more than 5 minutes. Another thing that really helped was talking with him, and sharing. Being vulnerable is a great skill that if we want students to feel safe and comfortable being themselves, making mistakes, what have you, we have to do that as teachers, and that we set the standard, and it takes a lot of courage. And another thing I talk about a little in the book that is oftentimes you'll see in special ed classes, what have you, some almost direct instruction. This is how you talk to peers. This is how you make friends. Doing role play and practicing that. Deborah, I would love to hear more about how you feel like that's helped your students. Another thought I have, is it's a lot easier to build community and make relationships around icebreakers or social activities and things than it is around math or comma placement. So finding time in our busy day where we can have more authentic, natural interactions, maybe aside from scholastic topics. Yes, I hear you, TA. I think we all are. Especially I know my girlfriend will tell you I was a mess all weekend. This is out of my comfort zone. Yeah, I've always heard great things about the Boys Town stuff. I've never looked in detail at it, but it's always something I always felt like, with the students I worked with would be a real great resource. Has it worked well for you, Deborah? Yeah, and it's a great point as well. Like the executive functioning of an area of our brain, it takes a lot of energy. Our brain uses about, I think it's like 20% of our calories go to brain function. And so it tires out very quickly. And having that high level focus, for 6 hours a day is not a realistic goal. So it's important, like somebody said here, finding those Maureen McCoy, finding those brain breaks. And yes, laughter, that there's a reason why they say that's the best medicine. So yeah, thank you guys for sharing. I better move along here. I try to give you guys some solutions. So hopefully by this point, I've given you a bit more understanding on the fundamental role of belonging in behavior and learning. And oddly enough, even though we are more connected now than ever electronically, many students and families are not getting that basic need met. So while the COVID years definitely compounded feelings of alienation, they didn't start it. The decline of community was increasingly being felt before COVID. This slide highlights some of the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors researchers have associated with a lack of belonging. I do cover the role of belonging and mental health in greater detail in the book. And again, Johan Hari's book, Lost Connection, is a great read on the connection between community and mental health. This Time magazine cover detailing an epidemic of mental illness in youth was from 2016. And I'm sure now in 2023, many of us educators would love to go back to the good old days of 2016. I recently saw a May 2022 survey of school leaders. It compared the student behavior of students in May of 2022 with the pre-COVID years. The school leaders said physical attacks or fights between students had increased by 33%. Classroom disruptions from misconduct are up 56%. And student verbal abuse of teachers and staff is up 48%. And again, it's not like things were great before COVID. So we opened with the question, how much of the day do kids spend worrying about what others think? Now I would love to hear if you are seeing these effects of rejection in some of your students. In particular, if you take a minute and think of your most challenging student, how many of these symptoms might they display? How many of your students display 3 or more of these? Oh no, Marin says all. So, yeah, it can be alarming. And, again, I hate to, my intent here isn't to, be bad news or what have you, but, I'm sure as you guys as passionate educators working with the students you work with, you see it and it's an issue. And it's important we respect the toll it's taking on our students. So when we start to look at the disconnection crisis and mental illness epidemic in our classroom, we can begin to understand how the decline of community has left young people in a precarious place. Many kids are growing up stuck in lizard brain, focused on survival, and hypervigilant to threats. This can create anxiety and contribute to depression. And again, I talk more about that in the book and share some strategies and more research around that. And there's increasingly a lot more awareness around it in broader literature as well. So it feels like something that really resonates with you guys, and I share your feelings. Real quickly, while the decline of community is likely impacting most students, it's almost certainly impacting some more than others. Students with disabilities, Black and Brown students, in many cases, female students, LGBTQ students are all groups that are especially vulnerable to the harmful impacts of rejection and alienation. I am part of a work group here in California that helps schools with special education disproportionality and equity efforts. Major focus of our work is to help schools understand the lived experience of marginalized groups, to help stakeholders examine their school through a cultural lens. So when we focus on the lived experience of students with disabilities or oppressed groups, teaching becomes much more complex. These are some of the most frequently researched areas documenting the psychological toll prejudice and alienation can take on a person's psyche. And while I don't have time to go into as much detail about these as I'd like today, the research is covered in more detail in the book. Real quickly, cultural mistrust. The history of this country requires as teachers, we as educators expect some skepticism from Black and Brown students, and we will have to earn their trust. Apathy. When we don't show kids how schools apply to their lives, they may begin to wonder why they are doing it. Stereotype threat. Stereotypes such as those Lisa Delpit highlighted in Multiplication is for White People can create anxiety when Black and Brown people are asked to do math, as an example. Similarly, low expectations. When girls hear things like they should focus on being popular or science is for boys, they are given the message that they aren't capable. And then learned helplessness. Students identified as learning disabled often have to combat the weight of that label while they try to learn. And then finally, last one really touched on in the book that was pretty eye-opening for me. Researchers, ambient belonging is the idea. Researchers were wanting to increase the interest of female students in majoring in computer sciences. And they found that altering the ambient social cues, such as posters and decorations, away from traditional computer science symbols, so away from traditional computer science symbols towards more open and neutral symbols, the interest in female students in computer science increased dramatically. And you can see more of the details in the book or in the research if you look up that term. So when we consider the lived experiences of some of our students, you can see that marginalized and alienated students will be inclined to be focused on self-protection and less able to focus on instruction. Well, thank you guys. It was great to try to give a voice to some of those students that often get overlooked or are not heard. So again, in sum, I wanted to quickly touch on 3 primary ways community impacts what is happening in the classroom. First, the decline of community undermines the ability of people to work together, placing extra burdens on our systems of support and complicates teaching. Second, it alters the brain functioning of students, contributing to problem behavior, low engagement, and mental illness. And then third, it takes a disproportionate toll on marginalized students and undermines equity efforts. Any quick questions or comments regarding how the disconnection crisis is impacting our classrooms and students before we move on? Maureen had a good point. Feeling anxiety and sadness is not always bad. It is a signal that something needs attention and needs to be the priority. Feelings are not bad. They are information. Oh, that's wonderfully said. You know, I use an example often with really physically aggressive kids. Our goal is to we end up trying to never make them mad, never make them angry. But like Maureen is saying, you know, anger is a natural human emotion we all experience. And it's not anger that gets them in trouble, it's how they express it. And so a big goal with students like that for me is teaching them, one, that it's okay, and giving them skills and strategies to express it in a socially appropriate way so they get their needs met. It's a very great point, Marie. It has a lot. I'm glad you raised it. Yeah, again, is it Marin again? So yeah, often in Western thought, we're very in the head, but a huge part of trauma therapy and what have you is helping kids reconnect with their body and learning to feel, and then learning that it's okay to feel that. You know, we get afraid of our emotions. Many kids are afraid of feeling those things. And so, yes, and that's easier said than done. But that's a big part of the healing is to help kids reconnect with what's going on inside of them and to feel okay with it. You also make a great point. A lot of kids feel that pressure to always, I think we all do, that we're supposed to be happy all the time or what have you. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Thank you guys for saying that.